Stampeders blogger, CFL Horseman podcast, a Big Brother Canada alumni. How's it going out there, Ryan?
It's going good, man. I see the main man's out on vacation. He's out there down with the Bulls.
Yeah, you saw the picture,
Texas.
did you?
Yeah. It's.
I was glad he was in front of the Bull, not behind it.
Roddy going crazy. Well, yeah. You know what? In front of the Bulls, not a bad place to be unless the Bull's running at you. And
well, I was going to say, we're getting kicked by it. I grew up on a farm, but we didn't have any livestock, I'll tell you that much, so I'm not very, very versed in it. Although we do have Agribition coming up here, one of my favorite events of the year, in just a couple of weeks' time. But you guys got a big game coming up out in Calgary, Ryan. What's kind of the buzz going on out in Cowtown this week?
Well, I mean, it's a little weird. It's an awkward part of the year because, of course, the Stampeders aren't used to hosting a West semifinal. We're just used to hosting the West final. The idea that there's multiple playoff games coming is kind of an odd feeling as of late. The Stampeders have done a good job in the Huffnagel era of winning the West and having that Western final playoff game. And so, I mean, I think there's a lot of anticipation around the Stampeders right now with what we're going to see from the Bombers. Waiting to see that depth chart come out tomorrow morning and find out whether or not it's Strevler or Caleros at the top of the chart. Apparently, they've both gotten reps with the one team this week. And also seeing what lineup changes we'll see here in Calgary as who's coming back from injury, if anyone's coming back from injury. Kamar Jordan's been practicing this week, and he could be a big add. But Eric Rogers has also not practiced so far this week, to our knowledge. So we need to kind of figure out who's playing and how much they're going to be able to play in the lineup.
Is there any sense in town that, you know, the players and the coaches, they feel one thing, but the fans definitely feel another thing, certainly about their teams. Is there definitely a feeling, and we've heard it this week from a few people, that, you know, Calgary used to be kind of almost feared? You know, you were going in there, it was kind of a David and Goliath, but it does feel like a bit like maybe the playing field has been evened up. Are the fans feeling that way? Is there any kind of nervousness?
I mean, there's always nervousness. It's less, I think, nervousness about the other teams having caught up to Calgary and more the other teams and more that Calgary has slid back a little bit. And a lot of that is injury related. When you look at the injuries the Stamps have had this year, they put 72 guys on the field. They only had 12 players who dressed for all 18 games, and almost none of those 12 were full game starters. So Calgary's dealt with a lot this year, and the roster that takes the field on Sunday will likely not be the best roster that the Calgary Stampeders have to offer. It's whether or not it's a good enough roster to beat what the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have.
Not that you ever want to have injuries, Jason, but is there something to be said when you do go through some adversity in the regular season and guys do get a chance to play in positions they maybe, you know, they maybe would have continually been backing up, but actually see some game time? Is there some benefit to that when it comes to this time of year?
Injuries aren't new. I mean, it's just a part of the sport. I think the benefit you get from that is you get these guys who are backup players who play some special teams who get a little bit more live action in actual gameplay, offense and defense. And then from there it translates into, you know, just a little bit more competency in the special teams coming through into the postseason.
Ryan Ballantine is joining us from the CFL Horseman podcast. So Ryan, I mean, this is almost stating the obvious, but just how important is Bo Levi to leading this team this weekend? Because he has been coming on in weeks recently and starting to look more like the old Bo Levi.
Yeah, Bo has done since coming back from injury. I think last week being the exception, they were really trying to force the offense through Reggie Bagleton, and we saw a lot of throws that we might not have seen otherwise. So I think last week's a bit of an aberration, but Bo's been lights out through most of these games. I mean, even the game they lost to Winnipeg, he threw for 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and 350 yards. You can't argue with his performance down the stretch. And he said he's healthier than he's ever felt at this time of the season by virtue of the fact that he was injured and was off the roster for those 7 games. So Bo is definitely the straw that stirs the drink for the Stampeders offensively. And given the lack of a running game that the Stamps have had this year, Bo's going to have to be on, and he's going to have to get the job done on Sunday for them to win. I think if Bo has a bad day, then the Stampeders' chances of victory really tank out.
And we talk about Bo, but hand in hand, it goes with that is a rushing game, and especially when we get into this time of year and it gets colder and we see teams want to be able to run the ball. Are Calgary going to be able to run the ball, and who's going to be running the ball?
That'll come down to a ratio decision, which again depends on who's available for the Stampeders this weekend. At times, we've seen Don Jackson as the starter here. At times, we've seen Antti Leader as the starter. Both of those guys, I think, are capable of running the ball. But a lot of times, and in talking to Dickinson towards the end of the season, Dave said, look, why are we running the ball if Bo's as effective as he is right now? Bo's throwing the ball with great vision, with great accuracy. So why would we stop his flow and take away from that downfield offense to gain 3 or 4 yards rushing? Which is what the Stampeders have been doing this year. But the offensive line has shuffled every week. And as a result, the chemistry's not there between the running backs and the offensive line. And when the offensive line has been the same, the running back has changed. Calgary's had 5 different starters at running back this year, and all of that was injury related. So as a result, now you find yourself in a situation where Calgary's rushing attack hasn't been as potent as it typically is. But I'm going to put that on chemistry more than anything else. The longer you can have that unit and that battery together in the same spot, the more successful it's going to be, and that's just not something the Stampeders have had all season.
Jason, do teams, players individually, but teams in general, do they look for extra not that they need it, but extra motivation this time of year? And one thing that I am going to is Farhan mentioning that he doesn't think that Andrew Harris needs any extra motivation, not getting an awards nod. Does that come in? Because I know that's a media thing and a bulletin board thing. Oh, here's extra motivation for these guys. Do players actually use that or even need it?
I don't think so. I don't think, to the point that people like to talk about it outside of those locker rooms. Like you said, they're pros. They get motivated as they need to, and I think that you don't like this stuff to filter into the locker room anyway. So every once in a while there'll be something that hits home to a specific guy. Somebody will take a pointed attack at them, and that'll hit home and motivate them, and which is justified. But I don't think it happens as often as people think. And
the reason I bring it up is again, just kind of a different year for Calgary. Just one player being nominated from the West, and that's Nate Hawley as the most outstanding rookie. But all the other categories. No Calgary Stampeders. Is that being talked about out there in Alberta?
I don't think so. I think most people that I talked to expected the awards to go this way. Again, it's been a kind of topsy-turvy season for Calgary injury-wise. Trey Roberson missed a couple games. He was the Stamps' most outstanding defensive player nominee. He could have been there. If Corey Greenwood doesn't get injured and miss the last 6 games of the regular season, and it sounds like he's healthy now, but if he doesn't miss the last 6 games of the regular season, he's a runaway winner in this category for me. He's still, I think he's 12th in tackles, in defensive tackles even still, after missing 2/3 of the season. The guy was chewing up something like 8 tackles a game, and he would have been the runaway nominee for defensive player. Bo was injured, and so Bagleton didn't have the season that Fajardo had. He didn't have the season that Brian Burnham had, quite frankly, in BC. And so while Bagleton was a great candidate for the Stamps, and he was the Stamps' most outstanding defensive player, I didn't predict him coming out of the West either. So Nate Hawley being the lone representative, I think is probably the right choice. I was a little, I thought that the special teams nominee out of the West was a little suspect. 25 special teams tackles is certainly an accomplishment, and I don't want to take anything away, I suppose, from Miller and Winnipeg, but 25 special teams tackles doesn't necessarily scream special teams player of the year out of the West Division for me. But I don't think Calgary's really feeling any disrespect. I think a lot of fans out here feel like the way the season went, and with the games and the injury situation playing out the way it did, it's not surprising to see that the Stampeders have a couple fewer All-Stars and a couple less nominees than they're accustomed to at this time of season.
Much has been talked about Paul LaPolice today. We've heard his name come up a number of times, Jason. how does the advantage, if there was an advantage, go to Winnipeg in the sense that you've got this guy who's been around the league forever, who knows how to game plan, going up against a Calgary D that maybe, he has more experience than?
Yeah, I think, and it goes back to this injury situation. It's what defensive backfield will Calgary have, and what advantage can Paul take as far as finding a weakness in both scheme and player personnel. What he likes to do is he likes to find something that you think you're good at, and he likes to tempt you with it and then exploit the weakness on the backside of it. So it just depends what he's seeing in the game film, and he doesn't do huge wholesale changes, but he will find a wrinkle or two that he can set up with successful chunk plays on offense that he can exploit with a shot later in the game.
And going to that, Ryan, can the Stamps D handle whatever running game it is that Winnipeg throws at them? Andrew Harris, maybe Chris Strevler. They do bring Lucky Whitehead gets the ball. They got a number of guys that they do get the ball to in kind of that different ways of running the ball.
Historically, Andrew Harris hasn't done very well against the Stampeders. Especially over the last couple of years since he's gone back to Winnipeg. Typically, when you look at Harris's game tapes for the entire season, the performances against the Stamps are normally among his lower rushing totals. But then, as you mentioned, you've got Strevler. If he's able to be at full speed running, he did a lot of damage against Calgary at home a couple weeks ago. And Lucky Whitehead is very quick. I mean, he scored that one touchdown against the Stamps on that end around. So once he gets into space, he can be incredibly dangerous. The rushing attack for the Blue Bombers is a very talented one and a multifaceted one, and one that you do have to pay attention to. Bringing Corey Greenwood back into the lineup and having Nate Hawley, Wynton McManus, and having that rotation of the three of them, I think will be incredibly beneficial for the Stampeders. All three of those guys, again, Greenwood being injured, but all three of those guys were in the top 12 for total tackles this year. Nate Hawley led the way for total tackles this season. And so I expect the run game to run into that linebacking core. And Calgary's defensive line is getting better and better as the season has gone on. They've had some real struggles early, but they're starting to find pressure. And again, that may depend on whether or not Cordero Law is available, as he hasn't practiced this week. So there's a lot of offensive tricks that Paul LaPolice can pull. But I think if the Bombers are going to beat Calgary on Sunday, it's going to be with the quarterback's arm and not with his legs.
And lastly, Ryan Ballantine joining us here. Okay, prediction time, I guess. You're from Calgary. Do you think that they win this and set up the showdown here in Saskatchewan in a couple weeks?
Yeah, all of the Calgary-Winnipeg games this year have been settled by less than a touchdown. Calgary won the game in Calgary. Winnipeg won the games in Winnipeg. The game is in Calgary this week. And really, if the special teams can be contained, then I think that's going to make the difference. I think that's going to be what settles this game for the Stampeders, is if they can contain the Winnipeg returners and limit them to what they're typically getting, as opposed to what they've been able to do against the Stampeders return D this year. I think defensively, the Stampeders as a unit are better. I think offensively, I'll take Bo Mitchell over every quarterback in the league without question, and the receivers that Bo has to throw to are top-notch as well. So I think Calgary's got it in them to win this game this weekend. But, I mean, if the Bombers take it, it wouldn't surprise me. They're a good team, too. They were predicted to win the West this year. They just didn't they weren't able to keep everything together after Nichols went down. So we'll see. Either way, I think it's going to be a far more entertaining football game in Calgary than we're going to see earlier.
Oh, wow, there we go. Thanks so much for this, Ryan Ballantine. Enjoy the game this weekend, and certainly we will be watching.
Pleasure as always, anytime, every time, and Epstein was murdered.
And with that, we got to go to break.
You're watching Rod Pedersen On Demand. For more of The Rod Pedersen Show, visit rodpedersen.com or follow Rod Pedersen on social media.